realize what's really important in life. You know, and this race is all about that.
All right.
How we doing? Over here.
All right. Doing wonderful.
Right here, right here.
That was miserable.
Go past the blinking light.
Oh, that was just never ending.
You guys doing awesome.
John was a little concerned about me. I'm hallucinating pretty badly. At least they're good hallucinations.
Also, right now, is we're not taking care of ourselves like we have throughout the race. Every hour we ate, consumed stuff, we were making sure we were drinking a lot. We weren't doing these basic things to keep ourselves healthy.
You know what I need?
There's no
I need a Zantac. I have like raging heartburn.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, they took a beating this time. They took a real beating. You get hooked. It's a spiritual cleansing because it makes you appreciate everything. All the small little things like a place to lay down.
They've persevered through a lot. Sleep deprivation, not eating a lot, maybe not being able to hold down food. They've accomplished quite a big feat.
After 3 days and paddling 260 miles, John and Jenny finally make it to Seadrift together.
I guess it's a testament to how much you do love somebody, right? Regardless of what state your relationship's in, when you can sit down and do something so difficult together for the sake of, healing all the things that have been going on.
Me and John connected on a level that you don't even think is possible. And it's amazing to be with someone through this journey and know that when you are at your lowest point and you don't think you can go on, someone's going to pick you up and you figure out really fast what you're capable of and, what's important to you out on that river.
It's great. It's a wonderful feeling.
The race was amazing, and it changed us, so it did what it was supposed to do. And we're absolutely addicted, so we can't wait to get back on the river now.
Let Passport to Texas be your guide. Listen to the weekday radio series and encounter fascinating wildlife. Explore cooking wild game. Enjoy the country's best hunting and fishing. Visit PassportToTexas.org to find a station near you. And remember, life's better outside.
I just want to make an announcement before we get started. Tom Thompson is in-house. On time, didn't run, didn't have to pedal fast. There you go.
He needs to have a medical exam.
Thank you, SAISD.
With that, we will call this budget workshop to order, and we will start with a discussion of matters regarding the fiscal year 2019-2020 budget preparation, including but not limited to 1, the general fund revenue and expenditures, 2, priorities and goals, and last, 3, other items needing council direction. And Tina, I think you're on, girl.
All right, thank you, Mayor. So the purpose of this workshop is, of course, to review the proposed 2020 budget for the general fund and to give council an opportunity to look at changes to what's proposed for revenue and expenditures, as well as other considerations that you'll be able to make. So we'll start out with a very high-level summary of the general fund, total revenue and total expenditures. You can see total revenue is proposed to be up about $1.7 million, with expenditures increased by about $400,000. We did provide you with the division-level detail schedules, and so at this time I'd like for you to pull those out so we can kind of go through that and see if you have any questions on those line items before we move on with the presentation.
Go back over specifically the property tax, very specifically relative to how many dollars were dollar increase in property tax versus existing property, and then the dollar amount that was new property tax, new properties added to the tax roll.
So there was a $200 million increase to assessed valuations, $53 million.
Not 1.3, right?
$1.3 million is the
Making
increase
sure,
to the
'cause
actual revenue.
Yes.
But the increase to the assessed valuations of properties was about $200 million. $53.3 million of that was due to new properties being added to the tax roll.
Just want to go back over that because at the last city council meeting we had, there was a discussion about numbers significantly different than that. And so I just want to make sure we're clear about how many dollars of increased property tax we had over existing property and how many tax dollars were added to the tax roll. So $200 million.
$200 million
to
added
existing
to the
property.
Yes, to the about 150 was existing property. 53 million of that was for new properties added to the tax roll. That is the valuation of the properties, and of course, that in conjunction with the tax rate is what produces the $1.3 million increase in revenue.
Correct. Thank you. And then on sales tax, relative to last year, the dollar amount is what percent decrease over projected 2018-2019 actuals?
So for fiscal year 19, we're projecting an ending sales tax revenue amount of $19.7 million. For fiscal year 2020 in this proposed budget, we've included amount that's actually conservative. It's a 5.5% decrease from what we actually expect to see in the current year, and the amount of almost $1.1 million. And the amount that we are proposing for this year is $18.6 million. That's what's been included in this current budget that we're proposing.
Okay. Does anyone from council have questions as it relates to the property tax dollars and or the sales tax dollars being projected at this point for the 2019-2020 budget? Okay, with no questions, move on to your alcohol and bingo tax.
Alcohol and bingo tax, we're seeing a slight uptick in that in the current year, and so we are projecting that up a little bit at $18,800. And that's based on projected current year actuals.
And your franchise tax?
Franchise tax, we're projecting up $81,000. That's in conjunction with increases water sales and sewer sales, because they also pay a percentage of franchise to the general fund.
And what about the other franchise fees?
There are franchise fees for television, telephone, gas, of course, Atmos, we saw an increase in that in this last fiscal year. Electricity, so
cable.
Yeah, but the bulk of it is due to the increase in water and sewer sales.
All right, so if we're taking a look at the Atmos increased fees based off of what they're asking for, how did we plan the dollar amount for this budget on Atmos? And the same thing based off of the new Texas legislative session, the changes that could occur in the cable, television, telephone.
So we did reach out to Suddenlink and requested some information from them. They indicated that they are actually not paying us telecom fees based on some federal legislation, so we don't expect to see any impact from that legislation that passed at the state level.
All right, so those numbers are basically flat then to what has been.
Yes,
meaning
ma'am.
Cable, television.
Yes, for those, we usually
Telephone.
use a 5-year trend look back and try to base it off of those numbers.
Could we jump back up just a minute on the alcohol and bingo tax relative to this year's actual as of today? What is the alcohol beverage trend line?
It's growing slightly. Year-to-date, as of the end of July, we were at $400,000. And so we're projecting it to be up about, I think, $25,000 from that by the end of the year. And so we are basing next year's proposed budget on those numbers.
So planning flat on those numbers, basically, because you're
Pretty
18,000.
flat, but slightly up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, and then on our charges for services, would you go through all of the items that are inclusive in that line item?
So the changes in charges for services has increased due to ambulance fee revenue. Of course, municipal court, we saw a decrease there because of legislation. So those are the two big changes in the public safety area of charges for services.
So primarily ambulance. Sorry. So primary ambulance services being.
Yes, so municipal court revenue was down $370,000.
Oh, let's talk about that. Why would that be?
Yes, if we can, do you want to go through these sheets, Mayor, that we handed out to you, the schedules? That way you can see right in front of you the numbers that I'm talking about. That would be your general fund. It says general fund schedule of revenues on the first page.
Right, but that's a huge
So in that
decrease.
far right column, yes, ma'am, that shows all of your increases and decreases that we are proposing in the current budget for
All right,
2020.
let's talk about a decrease of 368,000. Explanation?
We do have Melanie here with us as well, as she can actually come up and talk a little bit about that. We are seeing and projecting as far as the on our fees, the ticket writing is one of those. But Melanie, I'm sure there's others you'd like to discuss. So.
Good morning. I'm Melanie Wright, Director of Municipal Court. We do project a decrease in revenue for the upcoming year. Mainly there is a decrease in filing of charges.
In what charges?
Filing of charges.
Filing charges, ticket
Yes, ma'am.
writing?
Yes, ma'am. Currently, if you wanted to compare through July on this fiscal year to July of last fiscal year, we are down approximately 5,200 citations.
5,200?
Yes, ma'am.
And the explanation for that would be?
That I don't know. That would have to be a law enforcement question. We also have some state mandated changes from last legislative session that have affected charges that are filed in the court. For example, some of the juvenile offenses that used to exist are no longer filed in our court, things of that nature. So in addition to the decline in citations, we've also had a decline in some of the criminal offenses due to legislative changes.
Give an example of one.
Failed to attend school. That is no longer filed at municipal court. Used to be, and we used to file, I don't know off the top of my head how many of those citations, but that was a drastic change for the court. Those are now no longer filed at the municipal court level.
That's a big number to swallow, $368,000.
Yes, ma'am.
Has there been any corresponding decrease in expense that
We have
would help
decreased our
offset that?
expenditures as well. Unfortunately, it still requires so many dollars to operate the court. Even though there is a decline in the number of charges filed, state mandates have increased the workload in how we handle a lot of these cases. So there's still a lot of work involved and a lot of expenditures involved as far as processing summonses and notices and collection efforts that we're required to do now and that type of thing, that even though there's a decline in charges, there's an increase in workload. So the court is still operating basically at the same rate of workload, I guess you could say, that we have in years previous.
Yes, 1 second. Tina wanted to say something.
I wanted to
first.
answer Tommy's question. There was a decrease in municipal court's expenditure budget of over $157,000, and that was largely due to turnover and staffing changes.
But not relative to number of tickets or charges. Go ahead, Michael.
If you look on the third page of that report, you'll get into the expenditures. And in the top section there, the third line down, municipal court, on the far right side, you'll see that I think primarily due to turnover and a little reorg that
Yes, sir.
they and Daniel worked through. They've decreased those expenses. So, Tommy, if you were talking about municipal court expenses, they are down a little. And I think that is primarily due to that turnover and reorg that they worked.
We want to make sure that what we're not doing is decreasing the amount of tickets we write because it's an election year or things that can impact the function of our police officers, because 368,000 is a huge number.
Yes, ma'am. Unfortunately, the court has nothing to do with the amount of charges that are filed. We're just the venue for those charges to be filed. So that's not really within our control.
We want to make sure our city continues to be safe.
Yes, ma'am.
And that's a key point, Mary. You said safe. It really isn't about the revenues. It really is about making sure that the streets, that we do maintain safety on the traffic, So a lot of times it does come down to, if you pull somebody over, give them a warning, at least that warning will make it safer for the other citizens that won't be affected by maybe somebody running a red light. But that is the goal, to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make our streets safer. So.
Do I have further questions or comments from council? Thank you.
Would you like me to move on to the next line item?
Sure.
Okay. So the next line is, of course, fire, and that has increased by about $340,000 for charges for services, and that's largely due to the increased fees for the ambulance services, as well as a slight increase in run volume.
Any questions on that line item?
Moving on to Public Works, no changes proposed there for revenue. For Public Services, there's a slight increase in Parks and Recreation, and a very slight increase in the Nature Center. For Parks, there's a $2,500 increase because of reimbursed expenses. For the Recreation Division, athletic programs caused them to have a slight increase of $6,800, and the Nature Center had fee increases, which caused them an increase in revenue of $115. So those would be all of the public services revenues that we have charges for services offered.
All right, talk through recreation down $113,000.
Are you on the expenditures or the revenues?
Oh, expenditures, sorry. I need to go
Oh, that's
back.
okay. Do you want me to move on to that, or?
No, because I want to go through this a minute. So there's The only increase we see is in recreation in terms of revenue primarily.
Primarily, yes, ma'am. And that's because of new athletic programs and probably some of their fees that we looked at this year. About $6,800.
Questions, comments? With none, move on.
Okay, and then we'll move on to the Planning and Development Services section on page 2. At the top, slight increase in development services revenue with a corresponding slight decrease in planning of about $500. Permits inspections is a big one here that did increase by $106,000 for a revenue projection, and that is largely due to the fees that were reviewed this year and that council approved an increase for. You will also see at the end of our presentation that there is a corresponding expenditure that we're proposing for that increase to revenue. I just wanted to point that out, that we will be discussing that later.
All right, so we're going to discuss later the interest increases, and then the transfers in and out are really not a conversation, so. And you're going to talk about health services increase in
Yes,
revenues?
so health services, that $113,000 increase there is actually just a change in accounting procedure. We used to account for those services within our grant fund, Fund 103. Because that program no longer receives grant funding, we're moving it out to be accounted for within the general fund where it should appropriately be accounted for. So.
Good.
And then, of course, go
yes,
ahead.
Billy, go ahead.
Mayor, could we back up a minute on neighborhood and family services, code compliance, an increase in revenue by $56,000? What do we attribute that to?
Yes, ma'am. That is due to a projected increase in abatements because they are hiring 2 part-time officers, so they expect those part-time officers to be able to abate more properties. That will increase the revenue, but you will also later on see a corresponding expense to pay for those 2 part-time officers.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks, Mayor.
And why are the animal services down? I mean, it's not very much, but just explain that.
I'll have Mrs. Chegwin come to the podium, please.
Morning. Our revenue has been on a downward trend for a couple years now, and so it is down, not very much, but something that we just wanted to accurately reflect actual data. We've certainly been over front desk procedures and handling and charging and collecting appropriate fees. We do feel like that's happening properly, but just there is a decrease in our revenue that is still just in line with our actual activity. Yes, ma'am.
Good. Okay, so, and where it says other departmental charges, 12,561 up.
That is largely due to reimburse expenses from from SAPAC for operating the auditorium. We do charge out their utilities on a pro rata basis, and so we'll see a corresponding expenditure increase later on in the budget as well.
All right, and your interest projection is conservative and in line with our investment officer's projection?
I have spoken with our investment advisor several times. She's very comfortable with the projections that we're making. We will still continue to monitor that on a monthly basis, and if we start to see any changes, then we will, of course, bring that to your attention.
Any further questions on the revenue side of this budget? With none, move on to your expenditures.
So our first section for expenditures is public safety. We do have an increase for the police department of about $310,000, and that is due to budgeting for year 2 of loyalty pay and steps. For municipal court, again, we discussed that earlier, a decrease of about $157,000, largely due to salaries and turnover within that department. Public safety communications is down $7,700 because of salaries and turnover. Fire is up $180,000 for their expenditure budget. That is due to the training program that they are offering, which has a corresponding revenue. to target increased requests for chemical and medical supplies, as well as some equipment replacement. And for contract services, whenever their revenues increase on the ambulance side, they have a corresponding increase in expense because they do have a billing company that bills those runs out for them. And then last in public safety is fire prevention, which is budgeted down $25,000 due to full-time salaries and turnover within that department.
Okay. Questions from council? None? Move on to Public Works.
All right, so for the first one in Public Works would be engineering. That is projected up $85,000, but that is mostly due to a reallocation of salaries that were accounted for in the past. They were charged out directly to some other funds. They're now being accounted for within the general fund, and so it's just moving those expenditures from one fund to the general, from another fund to the general fund, and we are compensating for that somewhat by including those costs and services in our indirect cost plan and charging it out that way instead. Operations admin is up $2,900 just due to salaries. Traffic and signal control up about $6,800 also because of salaries. Slight decrease in street and bridge of $1,100. That's it for Public Works.
Questions for Tina on Public Works? With none, move on to Public Services.
So Public Services includes Parks, which is projected down $30,000 due to salaries and turnover. The Water Lily Garden, which is up $2,600. That's, of course, in line with the contract that we have for the Water Lily Garden. Recreation is projected, well, on this sheet, it's projected down $113,000. But if you'll look down the page at the Nature Center, it's because we pulled it out into its own line because we want to be able to account for the Nature Center on its own to kind of show how much it's supporting itself through its own revenues.
Right.
And so there's a corresponding increase to that line.
Yes, please, Lucy.
Tina, can you explain again on the parks? Why were they down? Why are they down so much?
Salaries.
30,000.
Oh,
You said
yes.
salaries and what else?
Just salaries and turnover. They have a hard time filling some of those positions.
And
Yes, Billy.
they're not going to plan on trying to hire in the next fiscal year?
When they have vacancies, as of a certain date, it's April 15th to be exact, we budget based on the starting range, the start of the range for that position, and so sometimes that's less if they have turnover than what someone in that position was making at the time. Does that make sense?
So you're not planning on fewer people, it's just...
I think Carl can probably speak a little bit more to what is going on in that department.
It's not fewer, not fewer positions. We've lost some senior supervisor positions, and filling those positions at a lower level. That's the reason.
Okay.
Thank you, Carl.
Any further questions from council? All right, so move on to the next page.
At the top of the next page, you should have planning and development services. The first one in that department would be administration, which is projected down $5,300 due to decreases in some salaries. Planning is up $2,500 because of some increases in salaries there as well. GIS is projected up $35,000. Again, that's due to a reallocation of where the salary was charged. It was charged to another fund. Now it's being accounted for within the general fund. And then permits and inspections is projected down $14,600 due to salaries and benefits. Again, just turnover within the division. And that would be it for planning and development services.
Good. Move on.
Okay. Next up is neighborhood and family services. First line you have there should be code compliance, which is projected up $65,000, mostly due to, as I mentioned earlier, the 2 part-time employees that will be, or I don't know if they have been hired, but have or will be hired to increase our abatements.
Okay.
Next
And
line.
animal services?
Animal services is projected up $17,000. That is because we did regrade those officer positions, excuse me, to be more in line with what our code compliance officers have as far as steps and certifications and things like that.
And social services, is that a breakout again?
Yes, ma'am. That used to be accounted for in the grant fund, and we're pulling it into the general fund because the portion that does not receive grant funding.
So legitimately, it's not greater expenditures, it's an issue of fewer grants and looking at it holistically as its own area.
Right. So anything that's in the grant fund should technically be receiving grant funding, and so if it's not, it should be accounted for within the general fund. And that is the same answer for nursing and environmental health, moving a little bit further down the page under the health services.
So if we look at it from a holistic perspective, then on the ones with the asterisks, all three of them, the 92,000, the 145,943, and then the $85,000, those were code compliant 65, all of those are significantly up, but if you combined them and took out the grant monies received, would we basically be flat to last year's or to our projected this year's expenditures in those categories?
So, yeah, holistically, for the entire city, funding-wise, those budgets, their targets remain the same. They're just moving from one fund into another fund, and we pulled any funding sources that were being transferred over to the other fund are now just staying in the general fund. So it's basically a wash between the two funds. We're just, because it's not a grant funded, we can't account for it in a special revenue fund, so it has to be accounted for within the general fund. So it's just a change, but it's not a change in funding level.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So I think I jumped ahead on health services, on nursing and environmental health. Those two line items are, as you explained, breaking out.
Yes, ma'am.
And so then we would move on down to general government line items. So go ahead.
City council is projected down $26. Good job.
Good job.
Yeah. We won't drink so much coffee.
Thank you, Tina.
I'm not booking any overtime up there. I'll be here at 8:29.
The city manager is up $17,000 based on changes in salaries. Internal auditor is up $600, again, just salaries. All of these are mostly just salary changes. For public information is down $1,600, of course, because of salaries and turnover there. City clerk's office is down almost $10,000 due to salary changes. Construction management is down $4,200 because of salary changes. And then the Development Corporation is down almost $57,000, but it's not an actual decrease in their expenditure budget. It's because we're now pulling, they used to be accounted for in QuickBooks, accounted for separately outside of our financial software, and this year we are going to pull them back into our financial software. So that's just a change in the charges that we had within our software that we were charging out to them that will now just keep in the fund. So it's not really a change in the overall funding level.
Okay. Administrative services.
So administrative services, the first two are city attorney and real estate. Those two both have a slight increase in their budgets. I believe that's due to the Westlaw software that they purchased for record keeping and maintenance. Finance is projected up $25,000. That's in line with our contract with the Tom Green County Appraisal District. That contract is increased by that amount. Billing and collections is up $3,800. That's just changes in personnel. Information technology is up $37,000 due to a target increase request for increases to our agreement with HDE or Central Square, which is our financial reporting software. Purchasing is up $11,200 because of changes in salaries. Human resources is up $126,000 due to some software purchases, and then also some changes in personnel and way that the salaries are allocated between our self-insurance funds and between the general fund. Crossing guards is
You should start to see some savings after these, with the impact of the time clock
I believe
software.
so. Actually, if we want to have Brian Kendrick come up and speak to that, I think
Sure.
he could give you some information.
Morning, Mayor, Council.
Morning.
Brian Kendrick. Yeah, I think that consistently what we heard from Time Clock Plus is that there was a 3 to 6% payroll decrease related to purchasing that software in other organizations. Now that would not probably affect our salaried, but more the hourly folks, so it won't be of the total payroll. But yes, we would expect that to affect that greatly. Any other questions?
Questions from council? No questions from council? We're done.
Okay. And then moving on, facilities maintenance is projected at $5,300 again, in line with the increased revenues I mentioned earlier related to the auditorium utilities that we're charging out. And then non-departmental is projected down $87,000. Included within non-departmental is tax rebates. We still have one tax rebate agreement with Glaziers for $77,000. We have the transit district contract accounted for within that account, and then of course civil service leave payouts that we fund.
Do I have further questions from council? Nope.
Okay. Moving on to transfers out, grants. Expenditures are decreased by $63,000. That's of course just in line with matching for any grants and grant activity. Capital is down $368,000. That's just the part that we transfer out to Fund 501 for equipment replacement. In last year's beginning budget, we of course allocated some of the sales tax surplus for additional equipment replacement needs, and so we're just taking that back out of the original budget. And then other funds is down $43,000. That includes transfers out for general fund supported funds such as Fort Concho, Texas Bank Sports Complex, and Fairmont Cemetery.
All right, so any questions from council on those line items? With none. All right, so what we have is, generally speaking, we have in total general fund revenues an increase of $1,664,000 over the fiscal 19 original budget.
Is, if you'll, on your slide up here, it's $1,698,000 total in increased revenue, and then $394,000 in increase in total expenditure, for a net marginal revenue of $1,303,859.
And that's over the original budget, but it's not the number if we looked at where in August our year ends in 45 days. So if you're projecting your 18-19 budget, not planned budget, but actual projected budget, what would those numbers look like?
We don't have that number in total, Mayor. But again, all of these revenue projections are based on that methodology.
The original budget.
Yes, ma'am.
Not on actuals. So
no, ma'am.
That's what I'm
our
asking.
our proposed 2020 budget is based on actuals, and most of the time we use the last 5 years, an average of the last 5 years, and use that as our basis for projecting what we'll budget for the following year.
So it's not just based off an original budget, just so we're clear.
Yes.
Okay, good. Do I have any further questions for Tina on where we're at right now? Doesn't look like it. Go ahead.
So just once again, we did talk about keeping the property tax rate at 0.776 per $100 valuation. Our FY19 certified valuation came in at almost $5.2 billion, which is a 3.58% increase from the prior year. Again, new property added to the roll was over $53 million of that valuation. And we do budget at a 98% collection rate to be conservative.
So if you look at the 3.58% increase from prior year, would you take away the new property on that and give us what the increase percentage was on last year's versus this year's without the new properties?
Kimberly can probably calculate that quickly,
Yeah.
but I will tell you that the $53 million in new properties yielded about $400,000 worth of that $1.3 million increase.
Right.
Mayor, which kind of goes to the importance of, you've been talking a lot about this as far as economic development and what that means to actually bring those new values, because it does assist in looking at the property tax. We not only look at maintaining the property tax rate, but even there's been talk about reducing that in the near future to
I'm
really
asking the
really
question.
tackle that. So yes,
Yeah.
ma'am.
Because the new regulations are relative to increase over prior year, not new taxes added to the tax roll, right?
Correct.
Yes.
And we want to talk about that because we want to make sure with the new regulations that are there, if we take a look at the trend line, it wouldn't initially have a negative impact on us because we would be within the range of what we're limited to in terms of what those increases legally are allowed to be
I
going
understand.
forward.
That's why you're asking for the percentage without the new valuations. Okay.
Yes, because I think the real going forward is what, 3.5 or 3.6%?
It's 3.5.
3.5.
3.5. So we just want to talk through that and show that we can still function and offer the same kind of quality public safety within the numbers that this year are forecasted. Not
Mayor,
maybe forever, but this year.
Absolutely. But again, that expresses the importance of making sure that we do have those new property values in order for us to tackle the needs that we'll have in the future. Since we will have a 3.5% ceiling, we want to make sure we do everything we can to increase those new values, and that way we have those additional revenues coming in. Absolutely.
We want to continue to support the public safety issues in this city, and so we want to make sure that those valuations continue to allow us to do that. All right, so next slide.
This is our slide that we show just to show the trend in sales tax collections, showing the last 5 fiscal years. And then moving on to the next slide shows kind of that we're running along the same trend lines with 2015 and 2018, but we're actually seeing increases even above and beyond that.
Go ahead, Tom.
Amazon effect to that?
Yes, there have
Amazon
been.
effect to your collections there, Tina?
Yeah, we have seen a gradual and continuous increase in .coms and those online revenues.
So let me ask, and y'all forgive me for maybe this question. How specific does that get by zip code? I know in the sales industry, Kimberly, this may go to you, sometimes you pay reps on the first 3 digits of a zip code, then the first 4, and as those digits expand to a 5-digit zip code, you're more specific. So when Amazon pays those or the .com revenue that we see come in, if somebody purchases it at all within the city limits or wants somebody from, let's say, Wall or Grape Creek, where does that revenue go?
It should be specifically within city limits. So any zip code that is within the city limits should come to the city of San Angelo.
What about ETJ?
We would not, I don't think we'd receive any revenues from the ETJ.
We're not supposed to.
We
Right.
shouldn't, right.
Yeah.
Supposed to, but if it happens.
Oh, we don't object.
Yeah. Let's give everybody an 03 zip code. Okay, good. Thank you, Tina.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from council?
Tom, would you?
But one of them's not, so yeah.
You know somebody that'd like to be in it.
Absolutely.
Any further questions on,
Oh,
It was
What's the
timely.
mayor's phone?
not,
Yeah.
it only happened one time. One time,
It's the first time we've ever caught here.
yeah. All right, Tina, go ahead.
Okay, so we've already kind of talked about this slide, but again, we're projecting $19.7 million for sales tax revenue, proposing a 5.5% decrease from that amount for a difference of almost $1.1 million. And here we have our, oh, what happened to your slide?
I hope no one's colorblind, else you'll not understand this slide. Because it's kind of hard to read what we're looking at up here.
Well, it looks like whenever it was uploaded, we'd have this happen before when we send it to public information. Sometimes when they upload
Brian's
the
fault.
slide.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's all
I'm not blaming Brian.
He's got a Mac.
I blame Microsoft for that. But it looks like it didn't pull in the actual names of the ranges, so I'm sorry for that. But again, this slide is just to show that property tax yields 47% of our general fund revenue. Sales tax yields about 25% of it. I'm going on that top graph if you want to follow the colors at least. Franchise and alcohol and bingo tax is 10%, charges for services at 13%, and miscellaneous is 6% of our revenue sources. Expenditures by department, public safety includes 55% of our expenditures, public works at 13%, public services at 6%, and then other at 24%. And then expenses by type, just under 70%, 69.97% is related to personnel expenditures. O&M yields is 23% of expenditures, and then transfers is about 4%.
Transfers aren't a revenue, it's just a shifting of dollars.
Right, between funds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have, Tina, and it's perfectly okay if you don't know this number, but I'm going to ask it, relative to our budgeting process and the way we break out, as you just did, the revenue by category. So, for example, our property tax represents 47% of our total, and sales tax 25%. Do we have numbers that we don't have to live in other cities, so we don't worry about other cities, but I would assume our numbers are pretty much in line with what most cities have?
Actually, a lot of cities will see a much larger, both property tax and sales tax revenue, depending on the
Well, total dollars, but as a relationship, as a percentage.
A lot of cities have a higher percentage of sales tax compared with their property tax because they do have that stronger commercial and industrial base that helps support the property
Correct.
tax.
Correct.
Yep. So that's why we continue to want to grow it.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. All right, do I have further questions and/or comments on the presentation so far? Nope, keep going.
So we're going to move on to some other considerations for the City Council. So we wanted to point out to you that you previously approved Police Department requests for fiscal year 18 of 5 additional officers. You also approved 5 additional officers in 2019, as well as loyalty and pay steps for the Police Department. In FY20, what's been included already in your proposed budget is $232,000 for a total of $709,000 for loyalty and pay steps. And then, of course, we do still have one final year of additional steps that'll cost about $175,000. And for the fire department, you approved in FY18 8 additional firefighters. And also in 19, you approved the first year of the SAFER grant for a partial year for that year. Of course, in fiscal year 20, we've included an amount of $148,000 in our proposed budget for that program. And then you'll see fiscal years 21 and 22 going to full cost.
So those are just automatic additions to the budget as we move forward from year to
Yes, ma'am,
year.
because we know they're already an obligation. We include them before we tell you any marginal revenue that you need to make decisions about.
Okay.
So other considerations that we wanted to discuss with you today include street maintenance and potholes, infill development, river stabilization, development services, software, police body cameras, peak hours ambulance, salary adjustments, and health insurance. So we'll go through these one by one and let you ask any questions or have discussion as we go through them.
Okay.
Okay. So the first one we have up is street maintenance and potholes, and Shane has provided us with some slides, and he kind of wants to go through a short discussion with you on that.
Right.
Thank you, Council. This kind of based off what Councilman Thomas had asked for 2 or 3 weeks ago at one of the prior meetings, City Council meetings, and just kind of wanted to touch base with y'all on everything since this has been such a hot topic here lately. And kind of go through some numbers, but just to kind of get everybody kind of up to speed on where we are as a city, from a city, when we look at the Street and Bridge Department and what they're responsible for. We have approximately 1,200 lane miles, 1,183 lane miles, and of course a lane mile, one mile it's a lot of street. So even though it doesn't sound like a lot, it is quite a bit. So then we also maintain 223 miles of alleys as well, and we do this with a whopping 37 employees. So we're we're pretty lean in that realm. So especially when we look at the labor positions as 33, management, administrative, we have 4. You can see average vacancies since October of last year. We've averaged 6 vacancies, and current vacancies right now are at 8. And again, it's a revolving door over there, especially on the entry level employees. So. Core services that we have for the city, or that this division takes care of, not only just is it street and bridge, but as you can see, our standard stuff: street repair, crack seal, alley repair, curb repair, and then vegetation control. We actually go out and spray curb lines and take care of those areas, the big medians, the one on Twin Mountain with all the rocks, spray and make sure that we maintain and manage all the weeds there as best we can, and of course the pothole repair. Utility trench repair for water cuts, sewer cuts, those type of things, go back and repair those. We also take care of the vector control, the mosquito spraying, and putting out the larvicides all around town. We also take care of the majority of the illegal dumping that's in town, that's taking place in town. And then also tree trimming when we have site restriction issues as well too. Work with code enforcement on those, try to get compliance with the property owners. If we can't, then our crews go in there and take care of that as well too from there. Additional things that we get tasked with at Street and Bridge are clean out and secures for the fire marshal's office, for the safety issues, and then of course the demolitions once they've had an order to demo the structure, we take care of that for them, and then of course there's tons and tons of special requests out there as well too. So,
before you move off that,
Yes, Terry.
Just because I have so many boarded buildings and condemned buildings in District 3, do we have a number of those demolitions that are waiting because you do not have available personnel to take care of?
Right. There is a huge backlog right now of dangerous buildings or dangerous structures that need to be demolished and hauled off, just simply because we have been so far behind our curve on trying to get caught up with not only potholes and trench repairs, and then of course, as we can see here in a little bit, the time it took for the tornado cleanup and the debris cleanup around town. As well as some of the issues that we had on material acquisition as well too. So we're just trying to get caught up with streets. The hot, dry weather definitely isn't good on our lakes or on our grass in our yards, but it sure has helped me on the streets get
Well,
those
to
guys
add
in
to
there
that,
and get
not
them-
only the
and get them caught
tornado,
up,
but also the heavy rains that we got last
Oh,
fall
yes,
season.
it
So, I
was.
mean, that started the season or the year off with some aggressive
It really
issues.
did.
So
Really
not to
issues.
forget last October.
Yeah, and that's why we kind of brought these numbers from that October time frame. It started raining in late August, September, and with all that rain, it started really just making the pothole situation a whole lot worse throughout the city. And so from there, we kind of started bringing these numbers forward from that time frame, because that's when we really started the uptick in the pothole repair as well too. So,
Shane, what
Yes,
kind of
Tommy.
backlog do you have on potholes? A month, 2 months?
Well, is that question attached if we get any rainfall? Because it's relative.
Yeah, that's.
Oh, so
this.
Oh, did I ask the right question?
This slide right here it helps us. It kind of knows what we have complaints, and this is based on what was just called into the Street and Bridge office and/or emailed in or come through over the city's website. Was just shy of 2,000 complaints. We have in that same time period, October through July. Approximately 1,500 temporary patches, which is kind of our throw and go, just to fill in the hole to make sure that it's safe enough for people to drive over, not tear up their vehicles as bad. And then we've done over 1,000 permanent patches in that same time period. Currently, there's still a huge backlog of the permanent patches, and we still see potholes. They're still popping up, even though it's dry. It's not raining. We're still getting them. We're still receiving the complaints on a daily basis. So we're still backlogged, but we are catching up a lot faster. But again, 2,000 complaints, and we're only at 1,000 permanent patches. So You know, we're still at 50%, so we've still got a ways to go.
A couple of days.
Yeah, we've got a couple of days worth of work. And when we look at it, and you know, just kind of looking at this slide as well too, you can see some of the other things. Trench repairs, 352 work orders have been turned in for trench repairs. We've completed 305. We still
That's
have remaining
incredible.
47.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Good job.
And so working through those, you can see some of the other major projects that this group has completed in amongst all of this, kind of in the same timeline. We've had, due to all the rains last fall, we had some on the Hickory Pipeline, some of the county roads out in the county that had some collapses under them, had some failures, so we had to go out and repair those. You're looking at the Pruitt Drive up there on the north end of Pruitt Drive. We completely pulled out and rehabbed about 250 feet of Pruitt Drive to get ready for the seal coat. Got that seal coating done. Major repair at 24th and Armstrong. I mean, you can just name, we've quite a few of these major projects that these guys have tried to complete in that same time frame as well too.
There's some really positive comments on the seal coat projects that are going on right now.
Yep.
Yeah,
We're
very positive.
and it's and again too, we're trying to still working through that and the seal coat project going on right now, and I've got crews trying to get out in front of them. I know we've taken several phone calls of the seal coat contractors paving over or seal coating over potholes that we haven't got out in front of yet. But again, we will come back. We will get them and we'll cut them out and we'll put permanent patches in them at some point in time. We just can't get there before the seal coat crews. And we're trying to get out in front of them, but there's just not enough employees going too many different directions. So it's kind of what it boils down to on
Mayor,
that.
they
Yes,
really
Tommy?
do an amazing job. Just when you look at those numbers, you got 1,200 lane miles. You got 33 labor people doing the work. That is 30 miles per person that those guys take care of. One person on a street. That's unbelievable.
Yeah,
Patrick,
that's
Shane,
not
good job
the,
with what you have to work with. That is unbelievable how well you do.
and that's with all the alleys and everything
Yeah,
else as well too
yeah.
that we're having to be challenged with in amongst all of that. So
it's amazing. Good.
In addition to the special requests.
Yeah.
that
Oh
you
yeah.
have
Oh, yeah.
From this time.
Yeah. And that one last slide, Tina, if you can forward that one. I just kind of wanted the interruptions to our pothole repair. Of course, we had the tornado cleanup, and these guys, not only the street and bridge crews, but the stormwater crews as well too, just did amazing work. May 18th to June 7th, 20 calendar days. My guys worked 17 days, over 12-hour days straight through. We did let them have the one holiday weekend off, but other than that, those guys worked straight through.
No, they did
For 17 days
job.
for over 12 hours. We averaged over 12 hours a day. So they did great jobs. The stormwater division continued even after that. After I pulled the street and bridge guys back off to go back onto the street, stormwater even kept on going from there, especially in the Bradford neighborhood. So going there, and then also we did have, due to all the rains and all the moisture, all the processing plants that we buy from in this region, our general region of Texas, all the way from Uvalde to Brownwood here in San Angelo, it was so wet that those guys couldn't make any mix, and so we actually went for almost 3 weeks without being able to get any mix to fill a pothole with or to do any patching with. So we've had some challenges there for a while. So. But again, this hot, dry weather, it's not good for our yards, it's not good for our lakes, but it's helped my guys out try to get a little bit caught up on these street issues. So just kind of wanted to give you an update. Councilman Thomas has asked for it. It's kind of where we are right now, and so.
Well, the issue is it's not that we're ignoring them, and it's not that there isn't a huge, big effort and a lot of energy put into addressing the potholes. So no one is ignoring the issue. No one is trying to ignore citizens' requests and needs.
They're not. It's just there's a lot of things within that list for those people to get done. Those few people that we have, 33 labor positions. We're short 8 right now. So there's just even fewer people that we have to stretch across all of those many jobs. And so, but again, the guys they're hard at it every day. So, and they keep plowing away at it.
Well, the turnover in, Harry. The turnover in employees should slow down a bit simply because there is a slowdown in terms in a lot of changes in the Permian Basin. So I think we'll see stabilization of workforce this year, unlike last year where there was just
Yeah, the last 2 years have been tough
higher,
on us, yeah.
and now companies are looking at it from more of a P&L perspective versus just throw as many people at it as you can. So I think that will stabilize, and as the employee stabilization happens, you should find yourself in a much better position. So, but again, thank you from all of us for the work and effort that has gone into, it's been a tough year, from the rain to the tornado to.
Yes, ma'am. It's been a tough year, but the guys, they've handled it well, and
I agree.
they're staying with it. And of course, I tell you what, 109 degrees, it'll hurt you pretty bad out there.
Oh, wow.
on a blacktop street. So
Somehow 109 doesn't even feel hot anymore after you've had all these 107-degree days, but it is hot. Harry?
Yeah, I just want to say thanks, Shane, for putting this together. I think this will answer a lot of citizens' questions. Those people that are taking the opportunity today to watch this, guarantee you they won't quit the phone calls, but it'll at least give the citizens an opportunity to say, hey, we know that you will get to it eventually. Here's my pothole today.
And I want to make sure citizens understand that every single council member has been very quick to react to their complaints. It's just a matter of how quickly we can get to them, because I know every city council member up here has had phone calls relative to potholes, and they have addressed it as quickly with you as they can. It's just a matter of how quick we can get to it. But everyone has tried hard to communicate.
Everybody's very responsive, and again, it's just we get everything on a list, and we get to them just as soon as we can get there with them. So, but again, too, we want to encourage our citizens as well to continue to let us know where those potholes are, because again, when I have those employees and they're working on specific potholes that have already been turned in, we're not driving the streets every day, and we don't see all of them all the time. And so it's always good for us to know exactly where they are.
Thanks for the great work.
Thank you, Shane.
What has the materials turned out to? Is it still inconsistent, or has it leveled back out?
It's starting to level back out. It's still a little inconsistent because everybody was without material for 3 weeks, and so it's still a little inconsistent, but it's getting better. Okay. We're able to actually keep some on the yard pretty consistently now.
Thank you, Shane.
Thanks, Shane.
Okay, next up for discussion is infill development.
Mayor, I can give a quick update on this. We have followed up as you requested. Bob Salas has had 3 meetings that he's been part of. I was part of one of those meetings, and the gist of what we've heard is to bump that amount up a little that we had proposed the other day. And they, in the meeting I was in, they emphasized that both prongs of that attempt, one financial side and one on the regulatory side, both were critical. In fact, the meeting we were in, they said the regulatory side was more important because in the
time factor,
the uncertainty associated with some of these areas meant that there was great risk there, and they needed to be able to rely on the predicted requirements when they were early in the project, when they made all their financial commitments. And so John James is working that, and I believe he had a meeting with his development task force, and so we are prepared to continue our conversation we started the other day on the financial side. John will let us know when he's ready to bring something to council on the regulatory side, and we've got a little more later in the presentation about the financial resources that we would propose as the beginning of discussion about how to fund the financial side.
Well, and I want to go back to the numbers that Tina presented earlier with the amount of increased property tax dollars that were added to our budget this year, which are significant. And this infill area is a big part of that because there's a baseline off of land value that is already in the property tax dollars, but there's no structures. And so we have a huge amount of property that is undeveloped in infill area, one lot at a time, not a huge piece at a time, but one lot at a time. And every time we put a new building on that property, the city wins. And as you can see from this budget presentation, that's a huge, big change in what we're able to do and fund in terms of public safety, as well as economic development opportunities because of those increased tax dollars. So we want to keep pushing that opportunity from regulatory, cost money. We got to make sure we're not getting in the way of development, and then making sure that we allow for infill to happen and don't decrease the opportunity based off of excessive costs.
Well, we'll be seeking your direction later on in the presentation when we talk about, we've got a little placeholder for some money to fund the financial side, and at that time we'll be seeking your direction for how quickly you want it brought back.
Okay, thank you very much. Next. Anyway, I should say any questions or comments, you'll ask them later on the presentation, okay?
Okay. So next up is Riverbank stabilization, and I believe Rick's prepared to speak a little bit to that.
This is an item that council, I think, keyed on some last year. You allocated some dollars. We had some hot spots along the river that exist in numerous places. You allocated some funds for us to address some of those. A couple of those were here near the convention center that have been addressed. There's 2 others that are currently, we had to get engineering done for, and those are out to bid. Those bids will be back in on the 17th of September. But basically, it's looking like for the most basic a fix, it's going to cost about $500 per foot. So when you get to those hot spots, you've got an investment, and that's not counting the fact that at the end of the day, we need to stabilize all of the bank, not just the hot spots. So
they don't become hot spots.
Exactly. So we've got places along the river, and we've got pictures if y'all want to see them, but the sidewalks are fixing to fall off. Once a sidewalk falls off, it's this far from the road. So, it's more major than just we're stabilizing the river. It's jeopardizing property and roads and so forth. But
yeah, I want to make sure we look at the 2 hot spots, but then look at the areas that could become hot spots. So
and to cover that,
yes.
We have in our inventory, after we address those initial immediate ones that we did a analysis from Johnson Dam, from Oak Street all the way to this bridge here after you pass the convention center on Concho. And I've got 20 hot spots in that area. And if I just assess those at the lowest amount at $500 a foot, now some of those are, if you were going to save trees and so forth, you're going to have to have retaining walls, which are more expensive than $500 a foot.
Right.
So just initially, you're looking at $800,000 just to address those 20 that we have already documented and identified. So it's bigger than that, but that gives you sort of an idea of what we try to do is, as any grant dollars come available, then we try to leverage anything that council allocates for us with some grant dollars. Last year we applied for TCEQ ones. We did not get those, but our intent is to keep trying, because sometimes we can double those dollars or sometimes even more than that.
Well, and once again, the positive thing is we got a lot of rain last year, but that rain created some issues of washing away. Yeah, it really impacted those hot spots. So I'm glad you've looked at all of those and put together a plan for us. Thank you.
Any information y'all want, we've got it for you.
Okay, great. Next.
Next up for consideration is development service software. That would be at an amount of $97,000 for year 1. And I did ask John James to be prepared to speak to this one so that he can kind of give you an idea of what kind of upgrades and improved efficiencies it would create for the development community.
This is important to me because we have put the software in place, but that software, by the time we got it in place, was old. And we need to make sure that we're as customer friendly as possible. And without these upgrades, we're going to end up looking, it's going to complicate it, not simplify the process. And I think this takes time off of staff, and it certainly makes the process faster, quicker for projects. So this, to me, is something that is very needed. So, John?
Right, and we've also seen, with the software we have, that's one of the things that's helped us reduce commercial plan reviews in half, from like 25 days to about 12 or 15 days on average. And so this It is helping, but as you mentioned, the software that we purchased was a one-time purchase. And so a piece of that software is about to phase out. The company will no longer be supporting it. And so what this does, it not only upgrades the software to the newest version, this will include future upgrades. So the maintenance fees, as you see, it's a multi-year maintenance fees, will include every time they upgrade the software, we'll get the newest version. So we won't be in the same position 5 years from now where, okay, now we've also got a 5-year-old software. It'll be continuously updated.
Have you gotten positive feedback from the community on this software program once it was installed?
Yes, absolutely. The
Yeah.
folks that are using it, and we're continuing to roll out more pieces of it, but the folks that are using it for commercial plan review particularly have been pleased with it. It's especially helpful, although our local guys use it as well, but those folks from out of town who are developing here, who maybe they're engineers in Dallas, the fact that they can submit their plans online, have us review them online, and email comments, that's really been helpful.
Okay. Do I have questions from council?
I have one.
Yes, Billy?
Tina, on the packet that you gave us, is that the increase in the GIS expenditure?
No.
No, ma'am, that amount has not been included in the proposed budget that you have before you. We'll talk about a funding source and a funding proposal that implements some of these considerations at the end of the presentation.
So none
Right,
of
so
these
none of-
things,
okay,
Billy, are
correct.
included in what has just been presented. These would be over and above what you've seen so far. Yes, Tom?
You know, John, we get a lot of material talking about the development of cities, municipalities. A lot of what we see is down for blockchain technology. And you read about people that can take departments of 15 or 20 down to 3 or 4 just by utilizing and capturing that technology. Granted, it takes 3 to 4 years to phase it in, and you wonder, well, I'm displacing 75% of my employees, but I mean, that's going to be the wave of the future with blockchain. Are we even looking at that as some future things?
Not at this point. I'm not aware of any the development.
It may not even apply to this
development
specifically.
review type software that's looking at that. I'm sure these companies are probably looking at it, but nothing like that has been rolled out into this type of software.
But this does save on staff time
It is, and there's a-
and development time from the outside in, so. No further questions? Okay, thank you.
Next up is body cameras for the police department. The current proposal we have is at a cost of $1.6 million. And we will be proposing an alternate funding source for that at the end of the presentation. I don't know if Chief Carter
Yeah, he's here.
wants to come up and talk about that, or? Put him on the spot.
Mayor.
Good morning.
Council. We've been working on this project for about 4 years now. So many times you see out there these critical incidents, and the departments that didn't have a body camera would have been facing a substantial lawsuit. It's a three-pronged approach, not just the body camera, but it's always also the taser, and it's also the video equipment that go in the cars. We currently have 110 mark units at this time. The technology in there dates back to 2003. It's outdated. For the last several years, we've actually been shopping on eBay for parts and cameras to keep these units going. So anyway, September meeting, we'll have an in-depth presentation. Open it up if you have any questions.
And we will continue to look for grants, right, for this ongoing?
That's correct. We applied for a $500,000 grant at this time for body cameras.
Great.
Can you touch
Do
on
I-
more
yeah,
of the
Lane, would
taser
you like-
portion?
Pardon me?
Can you touch on more of the taser portion of how critical that is on potential lawsuits?
Again, there's a bunch of features to this, but if several officers respond to a call and a taser is deployed, everybody's camera around there automatically goes off. There's 76 tasers right now that we have deployed in the department. We're probably spending anywhere from $20,000 to $40,000 every year replacing those tasers. With the program, on the third year of the 5-year, they come back and they replace the tasers, give you brand new tasers.
How many of our tasers are out of date and would probably not be covered by the company?
You're one of them. All 76 that are deployed right now.
Those dollars are included in this total cost, Chief Carter?
Correct.
Total
It
cost
costs
would be
roughly
over-
about $1,800 apiece.
Total cost would be over how many years
Total cost of tasers?
of this concept? Everything.
This is a one-time cost. It would be if you bought all the tasers that you wanted
correct. And
and
all
all of the body
in
cameras,
cars.
the total cost is the $1,665,860.
And we trim
So
that
that's
back.
inclusive.
That's correct. We trim that back from 1.9. We only give the officers that are actually making the majority of the contacts, your street officers with the body cams, your detectives right now, we decided to hold off on to make that cost a little bit more absorbable.
Okay.
Would that be over a few years, though, of payoff?
1.6 is over a 5-year period, so roughly $340,000 a year. If you just looked at the body cam, or the in-car cameras alone, that system is anywhere from $6,000 to $8,000 right now. So just to replace those 110 cameras in the car is roughly $800,000. We kicked the can down the road again, and technology in 2003. There's some of those videos that we have in the in-car, you can't even make out a person 10 feet away.
Yeah. Do I have further questions or comments from Chief Carter? Thank you. Great job.
Next consideration is, of course, the continuation of a peak hours ambulance. The cost for that would be about $264,000. We are recommending to fund this through the charity care reimbursement that we receive annually. That program has been approved to be continued until 2022. If you have any questions on this one for Chief Dunn, I believe he is here as well.
Yeah, if you'll come forward, just.
Morning, Mayor, Council.
Good morning. Do I have questions or comments for Chief Dunn? Well, I wanted you to walk up here just to get the exercise, I guess, because it's obviously explaining it. So, and is there, remind me, in this year's budget, there is a purchase of a new ambulance?
Chief?
I believe there is, I think there's maybe two in there.
For fiscal year 19?
Well,
or
this
20?
upcoming, sorry.
For the proposed,
20,
we include,
20,
yeah, we
19,
include one
20.
ambulance every fiscal year.
Yeah,
to be
so there's
replaced.
one more.
Yes, ma'am.
Those are replaced on a rotating basis, Mayor.
Yeah, just to make, it's a public meeting, we just want to make sure everybody understands the process and
Yeah.
what's inclusive in a budget.
What
'cause-
this is the manpower to man those and make the ambulance runs. It's not a capital expense for an ambulance. Those are listed in the capital budget. So what this is to pay the manpower to man that ambulance during that time frame when we make the most runs.
Mayor, I would like to point out as well, as far as the ambulance replacements, I mean, the cost has gone up tremendously, hasn't it, as far as replacing an ambulance and the new requirements that we have to meet?
They did 2 years ago. The Department of Transportation institute new mandates on what has to be on those ambulances and what has to be locked down, because one of the incidents that caused that was that ambulance wreck out by Sterling City. So they instituted new weight requirements and how everything is locked down in the back of the ambulance, and it increased the cost of that significantly.
Well, close to about $100,000 per ambulance?
It nearly doubled the cost of an ambulance for us.
All right. Yes, Billy.
On that last bullet, Chief, recommend funding with charity care reimbursement. Can you say a little bit more about that?
That is the Medicaid supplemental money that we've been getting back from the either uninsured or Medicaid patients that we haul that the state of Texas reimburses us for.
So does it cover the $264,000 cost?
We're projecting about $576,000 to be received in September of this year, and so that would be over and above the amount that's needed. Last year, we used, I believe, the remainder of the reimbursement to fund an additional ambulance, and we actually purchased 2 ambulances in FY19.
Thank you.
Lane?
So this is the third year that we've had the peak ambulance request. With the changes that we've gone through with the fee increases for the ambulance runs, should we be looking at, instead of having this as a consideration every time, just to include that as a budgetary item and include it from now on? What would that, it's The 263,900, has that increased substantially over the past 3 years for just the overtime?
It goes up a little bit at a time, because what that is how we man that is with overtime. They sign up and they come in and they work that shift from 9 to 6. So what this does is delay putting that 7th ambulance into service, which would cost the city $600 and something thousand per year. This keeps us within a range that we're not borderline killing fire trucks all the time to make those ambulances. So basically, this saves the city. If we can continue this till we have to go to a 7th ambulance, it saves the city $350,000 to $400,000 per year.
So the process works.
It does. It's a solution for now, and again, Lane, I definitely do understand what you're saying, but this is really working at this point. We do meet with the chiefs, the Firefighters Association representatives, and this is something that's really important to those officers, and it really is doing
Well, I'm
its
just
job.
wondering why we should always have a consideration item for this when obviously it is working. We just go ahead and include it into the budget and keep it rolling.
Well, sorry, if I
Go
may.
ahead, Tina.
The reason that we're proposing it this way on an annual basis right now is that we do have that Medicare reimbursement, and so we can use that one-time revenue source rather than using up some of your marginal revenue, and you are able to use the marginal revenue to do other things that you need to do with it.
It's easier to see it accounting-wise to make it work.
Budgetary.
Budgetary-wise, yes. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Chief Dunn.
Next consideration would be for salary adjustments. The cost of a 2% salary increase across general fund employees would be $873,000. The cost for a 3% increase would be $1.3 million.
All right. But let's just, regardless of those percentages, what we're really going to be discussing is bottom line, a dollar amount, because there will be merit reviews done, and within those merit reviews, the dollars will fluctuate in terms of percent increase relevant to that merit increase. So we're really not saying that everyone would get a 2% increase. What we are saying is that this consideration is for an $873,000, 200 impact to the budget, and within that, we would end up having the merit raises approach.
Yes, ma'am. So the cost of the 2% raise, again, is at $873,000. We would ask for council to direct staff to allocate that appropriately based on merit raises. So the dollar amount, you're correct, would be set aside for that purpose.
Okay.
Well,
Tommy?
Too, Mayor, I've been having some conversations with Brian Kendrick. We have some, I don't know what else to call them except structural issues within our overall compensation plan over the organization. And I agree with you, Mayor, if we would just start allocating a dollar amount for them to use for salary increases and let them work out those details rather than us dictating that, I think at some point it would allow HR to begin to address some of these structural issues. So, at whatever point we're ready to do, I would be glad to make that motion.
Yes, Billy.
Tommy, what are you, when you say structural issues, what
We've
do
got,
you mean?
just within the classifications, Billy, there are some positions that are just out of whack. And it's just one of those things that has happened over time. But councils, and this is not reflection on prior councils at all, but when we just, in my opinion, when we just say give a X percent increase, we are really further just making that problem worse within those classifications, because some of those within the structure, those classifications need to be adjusted more than just with a percentage that we allocate to it. So if we will allow the professionals, in my opinion, to take that stated dollar amount and start working within those classifications, they can address those structural issues.
So, the problem as you see it is at the bottom end or the top end?
Well, I really can't answer because I think you can isolate some individual positions and say, some of those may be at the upper end, but some of them may be at the lower end as well, Billy. So
it's scattered throughout.
I think it's scattered throughout the organization. So if we would just say, it makes more sense, in my opinion, to say we allocate this dollar amount, and then they can work out those details within the confines of the structure.
Well, and we have to assign a dollar amount anyway
Sure.
because
Yes.
the budget's dictated by dollars, not percentages.
Yes.
And so we have to assign a dollar amount to it. And then it's within the conversations with human resources and upper management in terms of how those dollars are allocated. But if those increases probably shouldn't even be up there. It should simply be, but they have to be. But I understand where you came up with the numbers. But the reality is we're going to improve a dollar amount. And within that dollar amount, we need to address all the human resource issues that exist. That's bottom line.
Give us this, Mayor, and I do agree with that. Just give us that opportunity to kind of work through some of those issues to develop what we feel is a structured plan that works for.
If the structural deficit or defect in some cases, it won't be fixed in 1 year.
No.
In one cycle.
No
You just
way.
attempt it.
It's yeah.
Billy, it may outlive some of us
Yeah.
on this council. So yes, you're
never-
correct.
That. Well, I just,
Thank you, Tommy.
I don't want to give any.
Well, I wasn't really talking about Harry, Billy.
But I just didn't want to give the impression that all of the structural
No.
deficiencies would be addressed in one
Oh, no.
increase, because it
Yeah.
probably wouldn't work with 2% to the bottom line or 3% to the bottom line to fix everything.
It didn't happen in 1 year, Billy. It's happened
Then it won't
over
be
time.
fixed in 1 year.
It's going to take several years to.
As it is on all the issues that you end up dealing with, whether it is maintenance, whether it is capital, whatever it is, and certainly human resources. So what we try to do is do the best we can with the money we have and start to address the issues. That's what we have to do. Yes, Tom?
I have no hesitation with taking something and putting it back into the correct department's hands on how they think it should be appropriately allocated. Because we don't know specifically how each one of those people go, so it's.
Not our job.
Yeah, it's by far better decentralized.
That's why we have human resources and city managers. They work through all those details, and we know they can do it. So, all right, next.
Next up is actually a good story to tell. Health insurance, as you recall at the last meeting, we're projecting a slight decrease to health insurance. We're proposing to leave the amount that the employee pays for health insurance flat and include a 2% decrease to the city-funded portion of health insurance. And you'll see that again at the end of our presentation where that added to our marginal revenue amount.
And that's relevant to the 2% decrease to the presentation we saw last week in City Council, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
So this is just kind of to remind you that we'll be introducing our budget ordinance on September 4th and adopting our budget on September 17th. So we do need your direction, as you just mentioned earlier, Mayor, from this meeting to bring back a budget for you to adopt.
Okay.
And here we get to the calculator sheet. And so we start with marginal revenue of $1.3 million. If we include a 2% across the board salary increase, those numbers are included there. They'll add up to that $800,000 number that you saw earlier. Health insurance, again, you'll see it added to marginal revenue. That's why it's in parentheses, just over $200,000. We have included an amount of $200,000 for infill development, $345,000 for riverbank stabilization, the $97,000 for the software for development services, and police body cameras. 1/3 of that $1.6 million is that $330,172. But as we mentioned earlier, we would propose an alternate funding source to fund the purchase of the body cameras.
Did we talk about that alternative funding source today, or do we wait? Tell us what the issue is relevant, because I think it's hard to sign off on $330,000 over the budget or under the budget, but you have a source. So let's talk about the source for funding of body cams.
So we do have the settlement proceeds that are now housed in one of our bond funds. We cannot use those proceeds to pay for anything other than public safety equipment or needs. That amount is $1 million. We have some interest income that has fallen to fund balance in both of the public safety bond issues. That equates to just under $300,000. Of course, these are all funding sources for all of the public safety needs, including the ambulance and peak hours. So I just want to say that to clarify. So $576,000 is what we're projecting for that charity care reimbursement for the fire department. And those are the main funding sources, and that all adds up to just under $1.9 million. Of course, as I said, we wouldn't use it all for the body cameras, but we would propose using some of that amount to front load kind of the purchase of the body cameras and then maybe spread the remainder out over the next 5 years or something like that. If you want to talk about that today, we can, or Mayor, we could bring this back in a more in-depth presentation to kind of let you see and make decisions based on what the needs are.
I want to, I'm fine with you presenting it at the next meeting and further discussion, but I want to make sure that everyone understands that I'm sure council very much wants to address these body cameras, the taser issues, et cetera. So there's a desire to support those requests. And if we have alternative funding sources to take care of those issues, I think we're all, I'm sure, supportive of doing it in that manner. We just want to make sure that we say out loud that the body cams, the tasers are a very important part of what we want to get taken care of at some level in this budget cycle.
Mayor, May
Yeah.
as well. The PD will be presenting, they'll have a presentation on the body cameras in the first meeting next month. So that would be more appropriate anyway. So that'll allow us to develop some options for City Council to consider as far as the funding source moving forward. So we'll be prepared to present that information to City Council as well.
We don't want to hamper any of our public
Sure.
safety issues, so that's an important part, and we need to make sure they feel the support of council. So would that be the September 4th meeting on that subject?
It will be.
The September 4th meeting, you'll present a more formalized presentation on the alternative funding for body cams, tasers.
And other public safety needs. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So with that, do I have,
So
go
can we,
ahead.
question?
Yes,
Tina,
Tommy.
Can we make a motion to do that subject to the presentation? How do we make it
So
subject to?
I'm not proposing to include that amount within this proposed budget. So you would be, if you give me direction, it would be to fund everything except the body cameras in the proposed budget. And then again, we'll bring back that other item for consideration. And if we need to include some amount in the budget, we can discuss it at that point. But if we can fund it all through other means, then so be it.
I'm
Right,
willing
you
to
make a
that.
motion?
I'll make that motion, Mayor.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor. Is there a second? Second. And there's a second by
Mayor,
Harry.
We don't need to take a motion.
We're
This is just
not
direction.
taking a
Just-
motion. I thought we just said we needed a motion.
No, we don't need
All
a
right,
motion.
so
This is just
what
council direction. We
Tommy
just-
is recommending is that we nod our heads yes to everything up there except the body cameras, which we're supporting as a conversation, and we will review it in further depth at September 4th meeting.
We have direction, Mayor. That's good.
You have direction?
Yes, ma'am.
We're good.
Have we looked at funding sources through the state, the
Well,
DOJ?
I believe Chief Carter indicated earlier that they have applied for a $500,000
He said a $500,000
grant.
grant.
Okay.
Yeah, he mentioned that. All right, with that, do you have the direction that you need to
Yes,
move
ma'am.
forward, Tina?
Yes, ma'am.
All right,
Absolutely.
so what else do we need to cover today?
That's about it,
That's
Mayor.
all I have, Mayor. Again, we'll be bringing that back on September 4th in addition to the budget ordinance. If we have to make any changes to the budget, that will allow us the time to make those changes before the second reading of the budget ordinance on September 17th.
And remember that September the 4th is a Wednesday, it is not a Tuesday of next
Yes.
week, so we won't be meeting on the normal Tuesday meeting date, 8:30, September 4th. Everyone have a great Labor Day weekend.
Thank you. Thank you.
You as well.
Wow, thank you.
Good job, team.